MCC, the Reformation of the 20th Century. Welcome to the Priceless Podcast. Hello everyone and welcome to the Priceless Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Michael Sechen. This podcast is made in partnership with the European Forum of LGBT Christian Groups. It is also supported by HMS. Subscribe, like, share, and also comment in the section below. Axel, welcome to the podcast once again.
My name is Axel Schwaigert. I am the pastor of Metropolitan Community Church in Stuttgart, Germany. I've been pastor of this church since 22 years now, as part of this larger church of this denomination called Metropolitan Community Churches. MCC is 50 years old, 52 years old now. One way would be to tell the story of MCC would be just starting at the start, like it's in the song by Julie Andrews. Let's start at the very beginning. We need to start a little bit earlier to understand how the world was in the 50s and 60s, because the world was very, very different in those times. The freedom in our world, especially in the religious world, was much less. The Castro formed, this famous street in San Francisco. The West Hollywood formed in Los Angeles, and the Village in New York. It was still very, very illegal in the United States to be openly gay in the 50s. There were clear laws against people like you and me. And so it was an underground scene, very much governed by the mafia. The Stonewall Inn was in New York, a place where gay men met. But it was a place of very ill repute, let's put it that way. And so two things happened in the same time in the 50s and the 60s. That bar scene and the people that met there were very much suppressed. The police did raids after raids. If the police needed a few arrests for their monthly statistics, they would run over one of those gay bars and just pick up. And no, they didn't pick up. They arrested a lot of people. Lives were ruined when they were arrested, because the next day their names were in the newspaper. They would lose their job. They would lose their family. They would lose their reputation. They would lose everything. So it was not an easy time to be gay in this time. On the second level, in the same time, there were already early political movements. There were always gay people who wanted to live their faith too, not only just to separate from their abusive and hurtful faith experience of the past, but who wanted to live their faith. And one of those people was a young pastor called Troy Perry. Troy Perry is the founder of MCC, or then became the founder of MCC. He was part of a Pentecostal church movement. Very much early in his life, became a preacher, grew up in this very spirit-led experience of church, and married very early, had children, but also had a gay experience and a gay life. His marriage broke. He wasn't able to see his children for a long time. He was thrown out of his church, of his faith, of everything he was and believed. Basically, what happened at one point was, and that was in the year before Stonewall, Troy Perry ended up in a prison cell for a night with another guy. And this other guy at one point during that night said, it's all horrible. It's all a catastrophe. Nobody loves me. My parents do not love me. My society do not love me. Those people around me, my friends and colleagues don't love me, and God doesn't love me. And that was the moment when Troy said, wait, that might all be true. But that God doesn't love you, that's just not true. And that's when Troy said, okay, I will start a church in the metropolitan area of Los Angeles, hence metropolitan, for the community, for the gay community, for those people I live with, I work with, I know. And it will be a church, Metropolitan Community Church. And he just took out an advert in this newspaper, a little advert, and said, if you want to have a church for gay people, come to Huntington Road, number so-and-so, on Sunday, the 6th of October, and there will be a church service. And his housemate, his roommate, totally freaked out. Absolutely totally freaked out. That was the first advert in a gay newspaper that actually gave an address. The community had just waited for this moment to happen. It's really interesting to see this little church grew within weeks to a place where you couldn't hold the services anymore in a living room. So they had to look for rented places. And I think his main sentence at that point was, God doesn't have stepsons and stepdaughters. God doesn't have stepchildren. That was more than a reformation of church. That was a revolution. That was just mind-blowing. People suddenly could come together and express their faith again. In 68, it was the first service. In 72, we already had 35 groups and churches meeting all over the United States. The other churches reacted very, very badly, as it was to expected. So the reaction from the other churches were really wild. It started from preaching against this new group. It sparked a whole wave of anti-gay and anti-homosexual rhetoric. The early MCC bought in 1970 a very run-down church building, renovated that, and therefore owned the first building of a queer group and a queer church. In 1973, only 3 years later, the church was burned down. It was very clearly arsonage. It was very clearly an attack to this church. In the first few years, several of our buildings burned down, and there were life threats, and they all came from the religious right. In the early idea of MCC, the gay community at that time was very male-orientated, and Troy's idea was very male-orientated. The first people who became pastors then in MCC were men. But of course, very early, women showed up in churches too, because they have the same experience. They were thrown out of their churches when it became clear that they are living with another woman. They wanted to live their faith, and they were always part of this gay revolution. We must not forget, it was lesbians who supported Stonewall. It was the trans community that supported Stonewall. In the beginning, they even discussed if they would ordain women. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. They just came out of this experience of being thrown out of a church because they were gay. And then they started to, we are not so quite sure if women can be, because they just brought their own history with them. So those women had to fight for it. And one woman, one of my religious heroes, Frida Smith, challenged them, really literally challenged them and said, I want that in the bylaws of this church, everything that is male is everywhere where it says he or man, it will be substituted for he and she and men and women. We also realized God is not he, which then led to this whole discussion about, there is female images of God we can talk about. Frida Smith and Nancy Wilson, those early leaders who were carrying their churches, had to fight that. And they won against us men. And I'm so grateful for them. Really, Frida is my religious hero. There was not only the gay movement, but also the sexual revolution. Just at that moment in the early 80s, when we then started as a church talking about theology again, because before that it was just about living and being and suddenly being allowed to, there was this thing that happened that young people suddenly, young men suddenly became ill. When they later found out it's a virus, it's HIV, it's and for a while, it was just like, it was the big shock of the gay community. And then the dying started. If you had a diagnosis of HIV and AIDS, it was a death sentence. My very dear colleague, Jim Mitulski, tells us he was the pastor of MCC in San Francisco at that point, which was one of the ground zeros. He said, if you didn't go to church for 4 weeks and you came then back, you didn't ask who died, you asked who is still living, because that was the shorter list. In that time, the women saved us as a church and as a community. We also can talk about the good times, because there were good times, especially what you just mentioned around Stonewall. A year later, they started to talk about how can we remember what happened last year. They thought about, let's have a demonstration. Let's have a little parade. Huh? In Los Angeles, there was a little group of people around Troy Perry and a few other leaders of MCC who said, we want to do that. And as it was to be expected, the police said no. Troy Perry is not somebody who is afraid of anybody. And he just went and sued the city of West Hollywood. And the judge, to everybody's surprise, including the gay crew, because they never thought they would be allowed to do that, the judge said, hey, yeah, they are paying tax. They have the right to do it. They have to allow to have the march in 4 days. Within a few days, they basically, with telephones, called everybody they knew and said, come, dress your poodle in pink. That was one of the words. Come with your car, come, dress up, we are going to march. And that was the first Gay Pride March, the first Stonewall Remembrance March, which we now celebrate all around the world. So those were the moments when suddenly queer people celebrated their lives and lived their lives. As much as I love my church, and as much as I think this church is the best thing since the Reformation, what we totally forgot for a long time, I believe, that our society, and especially the American society, we really have to talk about the American experience, the US American experience. Unfortunately, the African American experience in the whole gay movement was again a totally different than the white male experience. Unfortunately, in our church too, and for a long time, I think we didn't see it. Our second moderator, Nancy Wilson, retired after serving quite a long time. And we had several possible candidates. And one of these candidates was a very capable, very wonderful, strong African-American woman, Darlene Garner. Again, one of my personal heroes. I have to say that she really changed our church and fought a lot of good fights. And for many reasons, and I don't want to go into that conflict, we didn't elect any of those candidates. But suddenly, the African-American community in our church said, well, this is racism. We just didn't want this woman because of her color. Suddenly, we had to face that. That was a very painful experience for us, especially, I guess, now in a special way for us white men, because we had to face our systems that we didn't even see. And if we want to work in a world towards a more inclusive and diverse experience, we need to face those issues. And that means we have to face our racism, our international looking down at other cultures and countries. And for the queer community, also the trans experience, because we also have to face our experience that it's not just about gay men and lesbian women. It's about bisexual. It's about the trans people in their whole range of trans experiences, transsexuality, trans identity, trans experience. We need to face diversity as a challenge and as an opportunity. I'm 54 now. I don't think that I'm going to run out of work. And as long as I live, MCC will not run out of work. It's not the same work as 50 years ago, where it was all about white gay men trying to be able to celebrate service. We are gone by that, but it's other things. And there is still a lot of work. MCC has not run out of his work. We just have to find it again.
Thank you, dear viewers and listeners, for being with us. This podcast is made in partnership with the European Forum of LGBT Christian Groups. It is part of the Let Us Be Heard series supported by HMS. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, tell others about this podcast, and also if you want, you can comment. So thank you for being with us. Bye. See you soon, and bye, Axel. Thank you.
Thank you.